Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Frank Besta, and thanks for being with us. Last night, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance took the stage in New York for the first and only scheduled vice presidential debate hosted by CBS. You've probably seen plenty of the highlights by now and read up on everything that might have transpired or they might have talked about, but the question looming over all of that analysis today is how, if at all, the VP debate will impact the larger contest for the White House, which is just a little bit over a month away. It's hard to believe. So I'm joined now by staff writer Ellen Morrissey, our resident in-house expert on all things related to the presidency, with more on last night's debate, some VP debate history, and where things go from here. Ellen, thanks for coming back on the show. It's great to see you as always.
Hey, happy to be here.
So just to start off, to set the stage for folks, Ellen, how does Ballotpedia seek to cover VP debates for our audience?
Yeah, so it's pretty similar to how we cover presidential general election debates. So we do a lot with kind of providing numbers, context, history, that kind of thing. And then we also write summaries of what each candidate said on the debate stage. So we provide, highlights from each VP candidate with a focus on policy. And we generally kind of try to avoid hot mic drop moments and kind of focus in a bit more on the substance of the debate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Again, our listeners, if you're catching this episode here near the end of the day on Wednesday, you've probably seen plenty of those hot mic moments. But Ellen's been working hard all day on a page with everything you need to know about the vice presidential debate. So we're going to go ahead and link that for you in our show notes. Be sure to check it out. With all of that in mind, can you give us a brief summary of the highlights for each candidate? I'm really curious about what might have stuck out to you.
Yeah, something I thought that was kind of interesting as like a broad thing was just kind of the difference between vice presidential and presidential debates as far as like where the candidates are targeting their criticism, So I think on the VP stage, we see we saw Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, and Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate. We saw each of them kind of target their criticisms against like the opposing presidential candidate rather than the vice presidential candidate at the podium next to them, which I always think is kind of interesting. There's a lot more moments of actually, I agree with my opponent that I think we saw during the presidential debates that we've had so far this cycle.
Definitely.
I think there were kind of two moments where I noticed at least there was direct criticism of, Walz criticizing Vance and then Vance criticizing Walz. We saw Vance criticize Walz on Minnesota's abortion policy, and then we also saw Walz criticize Vance on January 6th and issues around the 2020 presidential election. But as far as kind of the themes each candidate returned to a lot throughout the debate, I noticed that Walz kind of returned back to the economy and some of Harris's economic policies that she's proposed, including her housing proposal, which is to build 3 million new homes and to provide down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers. And then also the child tax credit of $6,000. On the other side, we saw Vance, I think, throughout the debate return to immigration as a major issue, both, in talking about, supporting border funding, building a border wall, deportations, things like that. But then also he tied the issue to gun violence, saying a contributing factor there was illegal guns coming over the border. He also talked about it in relation to housing, saying that people in the U.S. without legal permission were competing with Americans for scarce housing, which was driving up prices. So, yeah, those were kind of the two, themes I saw them return to in response to kind of various topics in the debate, if that makes sense.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like however you might have interpreted how the debate went, there's a lot out there on who might have won or who did better at this or that. I think most people were really refreshed at how much policy was actually discussed, not what we typically get in at least our recent presidential debates. So it was really refreshing from my perspective to see a little bit more of that. Ellen, take us on a little trip in the time machine here. What impact have vice presidential debates historically had? I know we hear a lot of debate on the level of impact that they might have, especially in a close race like this. So what have been some highlights from past debates?
Yeah, so I was reading an analysis by 538 this morning. They're a kind of polling aggregator. They do a lot of polling analysis. And they say, according to that analysis, VP debates don't really move the needle that much. Since about 2004, post-VP debate polling has only shown a move of like 1 percentage point in either direction for presidential candidates. which is in part due to the fact that, VP debates get lower viewership than presidential debates, generally speaking. Fewer people are tuning in, so it'll have less of an effect. Although the article did note that it might be different this time around, since this is kind of the last debate we'll be seeing before Election Day, whereas usually in previous cycles, the vice presidential debate has typically been sandwiched between presidential debates. And then 538 did note also that VP debates can affect the favorability ratings of vice presidential candidates, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. There is some snap polling, like from right after the debate, floating around, but typically you don't really see these polling effects until like some time has passed and full polls have been out in the field in the time following a debate, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. And regular listeners of the show will remember when we covered the first presidential debate a couple weeks ago, we had Ellen with us, and we noted that this really would be the first time in a long time that we would only get the primary contenders for the presidency to debate each other once. I think at least now, based off of what former President Donald Trump has said, it doesn't seem like he's going to debate again. So this VP debate between Walz and Vance was kind of the last chance, it seems, for, voters, undecided voters, all of us to get some perspective on where their platforms are. And again, that policy perspective was refreshing. But coming back to Vance and Walz, one of the more interesting things I think we track on that page is how much space each candidate is taking up during the debate, literally how much time each candidate is talking for. So what did that split look like?
So it was pretty even. Walz spoke for 40 minutes and 42 seconds, whereas Vance spoke for 38 minutes and 59 seconds, which kind of matches up with what we saw in last cycle's vice presidential debate between then Vice President Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. Pence spoke for 36.5 minutes and Harris spoke for 36.4. Interestingly, Walz having a slight edge in speaking time is kind of the inverse of what we saw in the previous two presidential debates this cycle. Trump spoke more in the September debate against Harris and in the June debate against Biden.
And how did you get that information, Ellen? Do you have two stopwatches going at the same time while you're watching this? Okay, he's talking. Okay, stop now. He's talking. How do you get that? Is that publicly available, or do you kind of do we track that on our own?
I source it. Usually journalists will write articles about where they track the time for us. This debate's numbers specifically came from CNN.
That's pretty cool. What else did you take note of on their performances? Anything else stick out to you? You've given us a lot, but...
Something that was kind of minorly interesting and just as something that was kind of different from the previous two debates we saw this cycle was that there were hot mics allowed, so the candidates could kind of do a little bit more tit for tat, back and forth, talk to each other that way, ask each other questions. There were a couple of moments where you kind of saw that at play. Thought that was pretty interesting.
Before I let you go, what other key dates or upcoming events should our listeners be aware of with Election Day really just a little bit over a month away?
Yeah, so this was probably the last kind of big event before Election Day, since it's sounding pretty likely that we won't have another presidential debate between Harris and Trump. We'll have two more campaign finance deadlines in October. October 20th, we'll see spending numbers from September, and on October 22nd, we'll see the spending numbers for the first half of October. Otherwise, for our listeners, I think it'll probably vary state by state, checking on your mail-in and absentee voting deadlines, your early voting windows, and then that'll bring us to Election Day.
Got you. Well, Ellen Morrissey, in-house expert on all things related to the presidency. Thank you so much for your time today. I know, you're doing all kinds of interviews and everything these days, so we're very grateful for it, and I'm sure we will have you back on at least once more before the election. So thanks as always, and I'll see you soon.
Sounds great. See you then.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about our presidential coverage at the link in our show notes. Again, we've got that full breakdown of the VP debate linked there as well, so you're definitely going to want to check that out. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Frank Festa, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.